In about half an hour we espied our quarry approaching the inn. Poirot went out and accosted him, and presently brought him up to the room we had engaged. "I have been telling Captain Black of the mission which brings us here," he explained. "You can understand, Monsieur le Capitaine, that I am anxious to arrive at Mr. Maltravers' state of mind immediately before his death, and that, at the same time, I do not wish to distress Mrs. Maltravers unduly by asking her painful questions. Now, you were here just before the occurrence, and can give us equally valuable information." "I'll do anything I can to help you, I'm sure," replied the young soldier, "but I'm afraid I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. You see, although Maltravers was an old friend of my people's, I didn't know him very well myself." "You came down when?" "Tuesday afternoon. I went up to town early Wednesday morning, as my boat sailed from Tilbury about 12 o'clock. But some news I got made me alter my plans, as I dare say you heard me explain to Mrs. Maltravers." "You are returning to East Africa, I understand." "Yes. I've been out there since the war. A great country." "Exactly. Now, what was the talk about at dinner on Tuesday night?" "Oh, I don't know. The usual odd topics. Maltravers asked after my people, and then we discussed the question of German reparations, and then Mrs. Maltravers asked a lot of questions about East Africa, and I told them one or two yarns. That's about all, I think." "Thank you." Poirot was silent for a moment. Then he said gently, "With your permission, I should like to try a little experiment. You have told us all that your conscious self knows. I want now to question your subconscious self." "Psychoanalysis, what?" said Black, with visible alarm. "Oh no," said Poirot reassuringly. "You see, it is like this. I'll give you a word, you answer with another, and so on. Any word, the first one you can think of. Shall we begin?" "All right," said Black slowly, but he looked uneasy. "Note down the words, please, as things," said Poirot. Then he took from his pocket his big turnip-faced watch, and laid it on the table beside him. "We will commence. Day." There was a moment's pause, and then Black replied, "Night." As Poirot proceeded, his answers came quicker. "Name," said Poirot. "Place, Bernard, shore, Tuesday, dinner, journey, ship, country, Uganda, story, lions, rook rifle, farm, shot, suicide, elephant, tusks, money, lawyers." "Thank you, Captain Black. Perhaps you could spare me a few minutes in about half an hour's time?" "Certainly." The young soldier looked at him curiously and wiped his brow as he got up. "And now, Hastings," said Poirot, smiling at me as the door closed behind him. "You see it all now, do you not?" "I don't know what you mean." "Does a list of words tell you nothing?" I scrutinized it, but was forced to shake my head. "I will assist you. To begin with, Black answered well within the normal time limit, with no pauses, so we can take it that he himself has no guilty knowledge to conceal. Day to night and place to name are normal associations. I began work with Bernard, which might have suggested the local doctor, had he come across him at all. Evidently he had not. After our recent conversation, he gave dinner to my Tuesday, but journey and country were answered by ship and Uganda, showing clearly that it was his journey aboard that was important to him and not the one which brought him down here. Story recalls to him one of the lion stories he told at dinner. I proceed to rook rifle, and he answered with the totally unexpected word farm. When I say shot, he answers at once suicide. The association seems clear. A man he knows committed suicide with a rook rifle on a farm somewhere. Remember too that his mind is still on the stories he told at dinner, and I think you will agree that I shall not be far from the truth if I recall Captain Black and ask him to repeat the particular suicide story which he told at the dinner table on Tuesday evening. Black was straightforward enough over the matter. "Yes, I did tell them that story, now that I come to think of it. Chap shot himself on a farm out there. Did it with a rook rifle, through the roof of the mouth. Bullet lodged in the brain. Doctors were no end puzzled over it. There was nothing to show, except a little blood on the lips. But what? What has it got to do with Mr. Maltravers? You did not know, I see, that he was found with a rook rifle by his side. You mean my story suggested to him? Oh, but that is awful. Do not distress yourself. It would have been one way or another. Well, I must get on the telephone to London." Poirot had a lengthy conversation over the wire and came back thoughtful. He went off by himself in the afternoon, and it was not till 7 o'clock that he announced that he could put it off no longer, but must break the news to the young widow. My sympathy had already gone out to her unreservedly. To be left penniless, and with the knowledge that her husband had killed himself to assure her future, was a hard burden for any woman to bear. I cherished a secret hope, however, that young Black might prove capable of consoling her after her first grief had passed. He evidently admired her enormously. Our interview with the lady was painful. She refused vehemently to believe the facts that Poirot advanced, and when she was at last convinced, broke down into bitter weeping. An examination of the body turned our suspicions into certainty. Poirot was very sorry for the poor lady, but after all he was employed by the insurance company, and what could he do? As he was preparing to leave, he said gently to Mrs. Maltravers, "Madame, you old people should know that there are no dead." What do you mean?" she faltered, her eyes growing wide. "Have you never taken part in any spiritualistic sciences? You are mediumistic, you know." "I have been told so, but you do not believe in spiritualism, surely?" "Madame, I have seen some strange things. You know that they say in the village that this house is haunted?" She nodded, and at that moment the parlour-maid announced that dinner was ready. "Won't you just stay and have something to eat?" We accepted gratefully, and I felt that our presence could not but help distract her a little from her own griefs. We had just finished our soup when there was a scream outside the door, and the sound of breaking crockery. We jumped up. The parlour-maid appeared, her hand to her heart. It was a man, standing in the passage. Poirot rushed out, returning quickly. "There's no one there." "Isn't there, sir?" said the parlour-maid weakly. "Oh, but it did give me a start." "But why?" She dropped her voice to a whisper. I thought it was the master. It looked like him." I saw Mrs. Maltravers give a terrified start, and my mind flew to the old superstition that a suicide cannot rest. She thought of it too, I'm sure, for a minute later she caught Poirot's arm with a scream. "Didn't you hear that? Those 3 taps on the window. That's how he always used to tap when he passed around the house." "The ivy," I cried. It was the ivy against the pane. But a sort of terror was gaining on us all. The parlour-maid was obviously unstrung, and when the meal was over, Mrs. Maltravers besought Poirot not to go at once. She was clearly terrified to be left alone. We sat in the little morning room. The wind was getting up and moaning round the house in an eerie fashion. Twice the door of the room came unlatched, and the door slowly opened, and each time she clung to me with a terrified gasp. "Ah, but this door, it is bewitched," cried Poirot angrily at last. He got up and shut it once more, then turned the key in the lock. "I shall lock it so." "Don't do that," she gasped. "If it should come open now." And even as she spoke, the impossible happened. The locked door slowly swung open. I could not see into the passage from where I sat, but she and Poirot were facing it. She gave one long shriek as she turned to him. "You saw him? There, in the passage!" she cried. He was staring down at her with a puzzled face, then shook his head. "I saw him, my husband. You must have seen him too." "Madame, I saw nothing. You are not well, unstrung." "I am perfectly well. Oh God!" Suddenly, without any warning, the lights quivered and went out. Out of the darkness came 3 loud raps. I could hear Mrs. Maltravers moaning, and then I saw. The man I had seen on the bed upstairs stood there, facing us, gleaming with a faint, ghostly light. There was blood on his lips, and he held his right hand out, pointing. Suddenly a brilliant light seemed to proceed from it. It passed over Poirot and me, and fell on Mrs. Maltravers. I saw her white, terrified face, and something else. "My God, Poirot!" I cried. "Look at her hand! Her right hand! It's all red!" Her own eyes fell on it, and she collapsed in a heap on the floor. "Blood!" she cried hysterically. "Yes, it's blood! I killed him! I did it! He was showing me, and then I put my hand on the trigger and pressed. Save me from him! Save me! He's come back!" Her voice died away in a gurgle. "Lights," said Poirot briskly. The lights went on as if by magic. "That's it," he continued. "You heard Hastings, and you, Everett? Oh, by the way, this is Mr. Elliot, rather a fine member of the theatrical profession. I phoned to him this afternoon. His makeup is good, isn't it? Quite like the dead man. And with a pocket torch and the necessary phosphorescence, he made the proper impression. I shouldn't touch her right hand if I were you, as things. Red paint marks so. When the lights went out, I clasped her hand, you see. By the way, we mustn't miss our train. Inspector Japp is outside the window. A bad night, but he has been able to while away the time by tapping on the window every now and then. You see, continued Poirot, as we walked briskly through the wind and rain, there was a little discrepancy. The doctor seemed to think the deceased was a Christian Scientist, and who could have given him that impression but Mrs. Montrose? But to us, she represented him as being in a grave state of apprehension about his own health. Again, why was she so taken aback by the reappearance of young Black? And lastly, although I know that convention decrees that a woman must make a decent pretense of mourning for her husband, I do not care for such heavily rouged eyelids. You did not observe them as things? No? As I always tell you, you see nothing. Well, there it was. There were the two possibilities. Did Black's story suggest an ingenious method of committing suicide to Mr. Montrose? Or did his other listener, the wife, see an equally ingenious method of committing murder? I inclined to the latter view. To shoot himself in the way indicated, he would have probably had to pull the trigger with his toe, or at least so I imagine. Now, if Montrose had been found with one boot off, we should almost certainly have heard of it from someone. An odd detail like that would have been remembered. No, as I say, I incline to the view that it was a case of murder, not suicide. But I realize that I had not a shadow of proof in support of my theory. Hence the elaborate little comedy you saw played tonight. Even now I don't quite see all the details of the crime, I said. Let us start from the beginning. Here is a shrewd and scheming woman who, knowing of her husband's financial debacle and tired of the elderly mate she has only married for his money, induces him to insure his life for a large sum, and then seeks for the means to accomplish her purpose. An accident gives her that. The young soldier's strange story. The next afternoon, when Monsieur le Capitaine, as she thinks, is on the asses, she and her husband are strolling round the grounds. What a curious story that was last night, she observes. Could a man shoot himself in such a way? Do show me if it is possible. The poor fool, he shows her. He places the end of the rifle in his mouth. She stoops down, and she puts her finger on the trigger, laughing off at him. And now, sir, she says saucily, supposing I pull the trigger? And then, as things, she pulls it. Like, comment, and subscribe to hear more classic literature.